From the moment she was born in 1930 in the state of Michigan, Grace Lee Whitney's life seemed destined for performance. She grew up in a world where the Great Depression and its lingering aftermath shaped many families' realities. Even so, her mother recalled that from the time Whitney was a toddler, she was always dancing, singing, or improvising routines for whoever happened to watch. Whether it was a group of cousins at a family gathering or, famously in her own retelling, a set of ice cubes in the fridge, Whitney seized any excuse to perform. That anecdote about her getting distracted by the refrigerator light and imagining melting ice cubes as adoring fans has become a charming symbol of her early creativity. The story makes us laugh, yet it also foreshadows how natural performing was for her. She quite literally could not resist the pull of an audience, even if they were inanimate objects. From early childhood, Whitney possessed a striking clarity of purpose. Some people only discover their artistic vocation later in life, but she insisted that by 3 or 4 years old, she already knew she wanted to dance and sing. A typical day might find her humming popular tunes of the era or choreographing her own routines in the living room. Her parents recognized the spark and did their best to offer opportunities while balancing everyday responsibilities. Michigan at the time wasn't exactly a hub of show business, but radio stations flourished in the region, especially in Detroit, which was a major city with a robust cultural scene. By her teenage years, Whitney began exploring how to transition from performing for friends to doing so in more formal venues. It was a surprise to few that, at the age of 14, she secured a professional singing role at WJR in Detroit. This was no small feat. Radio in the 1940s was still a dominant medium for entertainment. Families gathered around large sets in their living rooms to tune into variety hours, musical broadcasts, and dramas. For a teenager to land a spot on a station was a testament both to her talent and to her fearless ambition. She had practiced singing in school bands, and her range was flexible enough to adapt to different vocal parts. When she auditioned, she immediately impressed the producers by showing she could handle soprano, alto, or even some slightly deeper tones if needed. They realized they'd found a versatile singer who could fill multiple roles on live radio, where adaptability was crucial. According to Whitney, this period was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. She knew a single slip-up on air would be heard by thousands of listeners. Yet the adrenaline rush that accompanied live performance fueled her. She thrived under that pressure, becoming a local sensation and building a small following among radio fans who recognized her voice. Later, Whitney broadened her horizons by joining a small band in Chicago called The Preview, working opposite Buddy Rich's big band. Big band music was at its peak during the 1940s and 1950s. Buddy Rich, a legend on drums, was a major attraction. And for Whitney to share a stage, however briefly, with that caliber of musician gave her even more confidence. She learned how to handle a crowd in a dynamic environment where band leaders expected quick transitions from ballads to up-tempo swing numbers. This was a world of smoky clubs, glamorous evening gowns, and the seductive thrill of big band horns echoing across a dance floor. Though it might have seemed overwhelming to some, Whitney leaned into it, refining her stage presence each night. As much as she adored singing, she was also drawn to acting. She believed that a performer should be well-rounded. If a role called for comedic timing, she wanted to deliver. If another role demanded emotional depth, she aimed to bring genuine feeling. She longed to reach Broadway, that shining pinnacle where the biggest theatrical productions lit up the marquees in New York. In the mid-20th century, Broadway musicals and plays were forging new levels of artistry. Giants like Rodgers and Hammerstein had redefined the musical theater form, and the success of shows like Oklahoma or The King and I inspired a generation of performers to head to Manhattan, hoping for their big break. Whitney was among them, though her path wasn't straightforward. She described auditioning relentlessly, sometimes receiving harsh rejections that left her questioning her abilities. Yet she persevered. Eventually, she landed a part in the Broadway show Top Banana, working with Phil Silvers. Silvers, known for his comedic brilliance, gave her a crash course in comedic timing. Even though her role may not have been huge, she stood on a Broadway stage, fulfilling a dream she'd harbored since those early days in her living room. From there, she moved on to a production of the Threepenny Opera, playing Lucy Brown. This was a starkly different show from the light-hearted comedic musicals that dominated Broadway. The Threepenny Opera combined biting social commentary with a unique blend of jazz, opera, and street theater influences. When Lucy Brown marries McKeith, it's a comedic but also cynical subplot within the show. Whitney had to adopt a different look entirely. To convince the casting team she could embody that role, they asked her to dye her hair black and gain about 20 pounds in a month to present a more robust, earthy stage image. She complied wholeheartedly, so much so that her own mother scarcely recognized her. This willingness to transform physically demonstrated her dedication, though she later joked about the culture shock it caused for her family back in Michigan. In the entertainment industry, success in one realm can open doors in another. Her experiences on Broadway introduced her to influential directors and agents who recognized her chameleonic skill set. Soon, Hollywood beckoned. While many East Coast performers hesitated to uproot themselves for film prospects, Whitney jumped at the chance. She soon found herself on a set with Marilyn Monroe, Jack Lemmon, and Tony Curtis in Billy Wilder's iconic Some Like It Hot. In that film, an outrageous comedic scenario saw Lemmon and Curtis in drag, fleeing from gangsters. Monroe dazzled as the ukulele playing Sugar. Though Whitney's role was relatively small, being part of such an illustrious production gave her a glimpse of Hollywood's potential. She admired Monroe's comedic magnetism, Lemmon's effortless charm, and Curtis's mastery of comedic timing. This environment was a far cry from her radio days in Detroit, but the set wasn't entirely glamorous. Long hours, retakes, and the pressures from studio heads underscored that success in Hollywood demanded more than raw talent. It called for stamina, resilience, and an ability to withstand a system in which power imbalances often went unquestioned. Outside of comedic roles, Whitney found steady work guest starring in westerns like Death Valley Days and Bonanza. Westerns dominated network schedules in the late 1950s and early 1960s, reflecting America's lingering fascination with frontier myths. Her transitions among musicals, dramas, westerns, and comedic parts demonstrated a remarkable versatility. She'd pop up in episodes of Bewitched or land a pilot spot in The Rifleman. Each gig was a stepping stone, broadening her network in an industry built on personal connections. One of the most pivotal relationships she forged was with Gene Roddenberry, who was then testing the waters for a project he initially described as a wagon train to the stars. Roddenberry had conceptualized a science fiction series that merged the spirit of Western exploration with futuristic space travel. The pilot for a show called Police Story brought them into professional proximity, and soon enough, Whitney found herself cast in what would become one of the most enduring pop culture phenomena of the 20th century, Star Trek. When the original Star Trek launched in 1966, few suspected it would evolve into a multi-generational franchise. In its earliest stage, it was a high-concept drama about a starship journeying through uncharted galaxies. Whitney was cast as Yeoman Janice Rand, an assistant to Captain James T. Kirk, played by William Shatner. Rand was to be professional, competent, and devoted to her duties. Whitney soon recognized an undercurrent of romantic tension between Rand and Kirk, though, according to the script, that tension was never to be explicitly realized. In interviews, Whitney would reflect on these unspoken feelings between Janice Rand and her captain. She described Rand as harboring a deep loyalty for Kirk, which might have carried romantic undertones, but it was never allowed to bloom. The production wanted Kirk to appear free to romance guest stars on different planets each week. If viewers sensed a real bond between Kirk and Rand, it might overshadow his potential dalliances with alien beauties or guest characters. Early in the show, one particular scene that appeared too intimate was reportedly cut from the final broadcast for fear it would suggest a full-blown romance. The producers wanted to sustain the possibility of Kirk meeting, and perhaps falling for, other women in future episodes. During auditions for Star Trek, Whitney recalled having little idea what the show was about. She knew it involved a spaceship, but the premise felt vague. Roddenberry's pitch was that it was Wagon Train in space, referencing a popular Western series that followed a traveling caravan as they encountered new and often hostile territories. For Star Trek, each episode would feature the USS Enterprise stumbling upon new planets and civilizations, weaving in moral and philosophical questions about humanity's role in the universe. That pioneering spirit excited her. She realized this wasn't just a routine show, but something that might expand the boundaries of TV storytelling. Though Yeoman Rand became iconic, Whitney's time on the series was cut short. She had only been part of 8 episodes when she was abruptly released from her contract. The official reason was that the production wanted to reduce costs and focus on fewer main characters. At the time, however, Whitney was battling personal demons. She felt unfulfilled creatively, suspecting that the show had no real plan for her character's development. That frustration, combined with mounting pressure in an industry that often undervalued women, made her vulnerable. In a devastating turn, Whitney experienced a personal violation on set. She was assaulted by a member of the production team, someone with enough power to silence her if she dared to complain. While the full details remained undisclosed for many years, she was open about the fact that this traumatic event fueled a downward spiral. In the aftermath of her dismissal, she found it difficult to secure quality roles. Hollywood's rumor mill can be cruel, and once you're labeled difficult or unreliable, even for the most unjust reasons, opportunities vanish. She faced a bleak reality, occasional parts in less prestigious productions, or no parts at all. Feeling disillusioned, she turned to alcohol and eventually other substances to numb the pain. She later referred to this period as hitting Hollywood Skid Row, a reference to the sense of being blacklisted or forgotten in an industry that prizes the next big thing. This was an era long before the Me Too movement, at a time when speaking out about sexual misconduct could destroy a woman's career rather than bring any sense of justice. The combination of her own sense of guilt, fear of retribution, and heartbreak at her abrupt exit from Star Trek took a devastating toll. She recognized that if she continued on that path, she would likely become another tabloid cautionary tale, one more tragic figure consumed by the dark side of fame, yet she didn't let that be the final chapter. Sometime around the 1970s, she confronted her addictions head-on, seeking help, eventually achieving sobriety. The moment she decided to get clean was, by her own account, a matter of life and death. She realized she was perched on the edge of an overdose or self-destruction. Recovery became her new mission, and it transformed the rest of her life. Remarkably, as she found stability, she found her way back to the Star Trek family, who in many ways welcomed her with open arms. After all, Star Trek was blossoming into a cultural phenomenon. In the 1970s, it was in syndication, building a fan base that held conventions and devoured official tie-ins. By the time Paramount decided to produce Star Trek, the motion picture, at the end of the decade, they were eager to bring back as many of the original cast as possible. Though Yeoman Rand had been absent from the small screen for years, the actress behind that character was now recovering her life, and the producers invited her to reprise the role, though at a different rank. She appeared in the motion picture, 1979, The Search for Spock, 1984, The Voyage Home, 1986, and The Undiscovered Country, 1991. Each cameo or small part reaffirmed her belonging in the Star Trek universe. By rejoining her old castmates, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, Nichelle Nichols, George Takei, Walter Koenig, and William Shatner, she rekindled old friendships. She recalled how meaningful it was that no one treated her as a failure, but as a survivor who fought her way back from a truly dark place. Her healing process included relocating at one point to the small community of Coarse Gold, California, in 1993. There she pursued a calmer lifestyle. She also dedicated herself to helping others suffering from addiction, using her own story as a testament that, despite stigma, a person can rebuild their life. She would visit alcohol recovery groups, conferences, and sometimes even Star Trek conventions to speak openly about her history. Her son commented that she wanted to be remembered less for her association with Star Trek and more for her survival story. She wanted to show people that they needn't succumb to despair, even in the face of near-total personal collapse. Whitney's personal life saw marriages and divorces. She married twice and had 2 sons. After the end of her second marriage in 1991, she declared that she would never marry again, a decision she seems to have stood by. She poured her energies into supporting her family, living a tranquil life in her later years, and occasionally revisiting the spotlight for cameo roles or fan productions. She appeared in fan projects like the Star Trek, New Voyages, episode World Enough and Time in Star Trek, of Gods and Men, reconnecting with fans who were always excited to see her resurrect Yeoman Rand, or, by that stage, Commander Rand, in a new context. Her final film appearance was in the 2007 Star Trek fan production of Gods and Men. In 2011, she appeared on camera for William Shatner's documentary The Captains, a project focusing on the actors who portrayed Starfleet captains across the franchise. That was the last time audiences saw Whitney on screen. She passed away in her home on May 1, 2015, at the age of 85, from natural causes. Many fans expressed deep sorrow at her passing, paying tribute to the complexity of her life story, a blend of triumph, tragedy, redemption, and enduring pop culture significance. Yet for all the heartbreak, Whitney's story has important takeaways. She once explained that during her darkest years, she feared being remembered solely as the Star Trek actress who ended up on Skid Row. But by facing her demons and stepping forward to talk about them publicly, she redefined her legacy. She became an example of how it's never too late to reclaim control. Although in the 1960s, women in Hollywood faced widespread abuse with little recourse, her testimony in later decades helped shed light on the difficulties she encountered, prompting fans to question what truly happened behind the scenes. It's worth considering how early Star Trek contributed to her sense of purpose. Despite her small number of episodes, Whitney's portrayal of Janice Rand made a strong impression. Rand, with her woven basket-style hairdo, which Whitney said took up to an hour to prepare, became a recognizable figure in pop culture. Fans at conventions would line up to get her autograph, praising the loyalty and sincerity she brought to the show. Outside the fictional universe, her castmates also recognized her comedic instincts and warmth, even if those qualities didn't always get showcased in scripts. Many Star Trek fans, especially women, related to Rand's position. She was capable and hardworking, but overshadowed by larger personalities on the ship. That dynamic mirrored real-world workplaces, in which women often found themselves working diligently behind the scenes without receiving substantial recognition. Looking beyond Star Trek, Whitney's broader career in film and television underscores the challenges many female performers faced in that era. Hollywood was an environment shaped by rigid studio hierarchies. Producers and studio executives held enormous power over casting decisions. An actress might be catapulted to stardom if she happened to fit a current trend or resonate with a particular director's vision. But the same actress could be cast aside if she reported abuse, clashed with a powerful figure, or simply didn't fit the new marketing strategy. Whitney, in her own words, admitted she never achieved the same status as the biggest female stars of the 1950s and 1960s. But she carved out a distinct identity through a combination of sheer talent and perseverance. Her association with Some Like It Hot placed her in proximity to Marilyn Monroe, an icon whose life was also marked by struggles with substance abuse and exploitation. Monroe's challenges, not dissimilar in certain respects, highlighted a pattern in Hollywood. There was widespread exploitation of young, attractive actresses who were often used up for the camera and then left adrift when they were no longer seen as profitable. Seeing Monroe's trajectory might have served as an ominous warning. If the most famous star in the world could be so vulnerable, so could anyone else, including a bright-eyed singer from Michigan determined to make it big. Whitney herself once remarked that Hollywood's outward glamour masked a brutal reality. People who thrived were those who either kept their heads down, tolerated injustices, or had enough influence to push back. When she spoke publicly about the assault she endured on Star Trek, she explained that fear kept her silent. If she had reported it, she might have been labeled a troublemaker or, worse, blacklisted. In that era, the press typically sided with studios, and an actress making such accusations risked condemnation for hurting the brand. She believed that speaking up would have ended her career even faster than it did, so she buried her anger and humiliation, resorting to self-medication with alcohol. It took decades of reflection and the relative freedom of no longer relying on Hollywood for her primary income to get to a point where she could discuss it. She wrote candidly in her autobiography, published years later, about the ordeal, naming it as a catalyst for her addiction spiral. She addressed it honestly, not to blame the entire Star Trek production. She maintained affection for many of the cast and crew, but to highlight the actions of one individual and the complicity of a system that tried to hide such incidents. Her final act of redemption came not merely in her personal sobriety, but in her ability to transform her suffering into a resource. She became an advocate for recovery, speaking at conventions and counseling individuals who reached out to her. Even in her advanced age, she showed up at fan events, signing autographs and chatting warmly about both the good times on Star Trek and the heartbreak that followed. She insisted that life can present second chances. For her, that second chance included bridging old rifts with co-stars and rejoining the franchise for cameo roles that fans still celebrate. For a woman who once worried she'd be remembered only for a meltdown, Grace Lee Whitney ended up becoming a beacon of hope for those who believed they, too, might bounce back from adversity. In interviews, when asked if she ever regretted the path her life took, she would acknowledge the pain, but then emphasize that all of it led her to a place of deeper compassion. She would rather have gone through that darkness and emerged with a sense of empathy, she said, than lived a life of ease without ever understanding suffering. We might also reflect on how the public image of being fired from Star Trek overshadowed the complexities behind the scenes. For decades, fans wondered why Yeoman Rand vanished after the first episodes. Some believed it was simply a creative decision, while others guessed budget cuts or behind-the-scenes conflicts. Whitney's revelations offered clarity, but also prompted troubling questions about what else might have happened to other female cast members or crew who never came forward. In the broader scope of entertainment history, her story resonates with those of many other actresses from the 1950s through the 1970s who endured harassment or assault but felt powerless to speak. Her cameo in Star Trek: The Motion Picture was pivotal. Though the film itself received mixed reviews, some praising its grand visuals, others calling it slow, for Whitney, it was a moment of personal victory. She stood on a massive set, wearing a Starfleet uniform, recognized and respected by the same production that had once dismissed her. She returned again in The Search for Spock, The Voyage Home, and The Undiscovered Country. In each of these, her role might not have been the centerpiece, yet every time she stepped on set, it was an affirmation that she was part of the Star Trek family, no longer relegated to the past. Her cameo in the Voyager episode Flashback 1996 was another treat for fans, linking her character's history to that of Tuvok, played by Tim Russ. Viewers cherished these callbacks, both for nostalgia and for the real-life storyline of an actress who overcame adversity. One might assume all Star Trek cast members soared to success after the original series ended, but that was hardly the case. While William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley found new projects or recurring gigs, and Nichelle Nichols became a NASA ambassador. In addition to continuing her acting, others struggled. For instance, George Takei forged a career in local politics and voice acting before re-emerging as a social media figure. Walter Koenig turned to writing and teaching. Whitney, though, faced a different level of challenge due to the personal trauma she experienced, combined with the heavy hand of addiction. That's part of what makes her comeback so stirring. In 1993, after her second divorce, Whitney's move to coarse gold was more than a change of address. It symbolized a choice to step out of the frantic cycle she'd known for so long. Coarse Gold is a small community in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains near Yosemite National Park. There, she cultivated an environment where she could stay grounded, spending more time on personal reflection, journaling, and working with local groups to promote sobriety. She discovered a sense of serenity in the natural landscape, a stark contrast to the stifling environment of Hollywood. Over the ensuing years, she occasionally traveled for speaking engagements, but her everyday routine became simpler. She described looking out at rolling hills instead of traffic jams, inhaling fresh air, and feeling at peace. The question many fans raise is, why did she stay silent about the assault for so long? There are multiple potential answers. First, the 1960s cultural climate was starkly different. Women who reported sexual assault often faced victim blaming, even from their own studios. Second, the Star Trek producers or network executives might have pressured her to keep quiet to protect the show's reputation. In an industry reliant on public image, the cost of scandal could doom a series. Finally, Whitney herself might have been wrestling with denial, shame, and fear of being disbelieved. Over time, she realized bearing that secret was fueling her substance abuse. But the journey to being able to speak openly took decades. By the time she felt safe enough to reveal it, many fans had wondered for years about the real reason for her abrupt departure from the show. For some, her silence mirrored the experiences of countless others in Hollywood who endured exploitation. A code of silence was effectively enforced. Speak up and you lose your job, your credibility, or your chance at future success. The shockwaves from the Me Too movement that began around 2017 show how far-reaching that issue was, and how the cultural climate in the 1960s, 1970s, and even beyond seldom provided an avenue for women to come forward without facing major retaliation. Yet Grace Lee Whitney not only survived but found her voice to talk about it later, serving as a cautionary tale about the era and also an inspirational figure. She wanted the younger generation to know the dangers of letting shame or fear drive you into substance abuse or self-destructive habits. She consistently framed her story as one of ultimate redemption. Friends and fans recall how, by the 1990s and early 2000s, her face would light up with genuine joy at conventions. She'd sign pictures of Yeoman Rand and share funny memories about William Shatner's on-set pranks, DeForest Kelley's gentle demeanor, or Leonard Nimoy's thoughtful approach to the role of Spock. All the while she reminded them that this same environment also harbored painful secrets. People admired the frankness with which she navigated those contradictions. Her final public appearance on screen was in William Shatner's 2011 documentary The Captains, which celebrated the actors who took on the mantle of starship captain in the Star Trek franchise. Although she never played a captain, her cameo reflected the legacy of the original cast. They had become ambassadors of hope and adventure to countless fans. She chatted warmly, reminiscent of an elder stateswoman of the fandom, comfortable in the knowledge that she helped shape a universe that decades later was bigger than ever. New generations of fans discover the original show all the time, connecting with the ideals of exploration, tolerance, and curiosity that define Star Trek's worldview. While she may not have sought another marriage after 1991, she did not retreat from human connection. She was close with her two sons, and later in life she befriended individuals through the church communities she supported. She also remained active in philanthropy, donating her time to addiction centers. This altruism had deep roots in her own story. She believed that by guiding others who felt lost, she honored the second chance she had been given. Whitney died of natural causes on May 1, 2015, at the age of 85, in the comfort of her home in Coarsegold. News of her passing spread quickly among Star Trek circles, with fans sharing anecdotes about meeting her at conventions and being struck by how kind she was. Many offered tributes online, emphasizing that she overcame the harrowing obstacles that threatened to break her spirit. She left behind a nuanced legacy, part Star Trek icon, part cautionary tale, part motivational figure for those battling addiction or grappling with abuse in the industry. There's a question that remains. Had Hollywood or the culture been more supportive, might Whitney's career path have been drastically different? Perhaps Yeoman Rand would have played a much bigger role in Star Trek. Perhaps Whitney would have taken more comedic or dramatic roles in mainstream films. But one of the key insights from her life is that she transcended the notion of what might have been by focusing on what she could do going forward. When she returned to the series, even briefly, it was a vindication of sorts, telling her old fans, "I'm still here. I overcame." We're also left to ponder, could she have thrived had she spoken up about the assault immediately? The industry in the 1960s was harsh on whistleblowers, especially female ones. Numerous stories from that period show women losing contracts or being swiftly replaced if they aired conflicts. The fear of never working again was potent, so in that environment, Whitney's silence, however painful, was understandable. Over time, the conversation about accountability changed, and she was eventually able to share her truth, though it was long after the fact. Her story further highlights the curious phenomenon of the Star Trek bubble. Many cast members from that original series found themselves emotionally linked to the franchise for life. They attended conventions in the 1970s when Star Trek mania swelled. They saw new generations, the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, the Kelvin Timeline films, Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, each iteration building on Roddenberry's original concept. Whitney was gratified that her cameo in Voyager connected her character to that future, bridging across decades of storytelling. She was proud to see how the franchise, initially a modest project, had grown into a phenomenon that emphasized unity, exploration, and cultural progress. Some might wonder why, after surviving so many hardships, she chose a quiet life in Coarse Gold rather than returning full-time to Los Angeles. The answer lies partly in her personal reflection. She learned that success in the typical Hollywood sense wasn't her priority anymore. She wanted peace, time with family, and a chance to use her experiences to help those struggling. Having confronted the darkest corners of her past, she found renewed purpose in being a voice of hope. For her, that was more fulfilling than the uncertainty of chasing roles in a highly competitive environment. In addition to talking about addiction, she became an advocate for tackling exploitation in the entertainment world. She did so subtly, not leading high-profile campaigns, but by making sure that any fans or peers who confided in her about similar experiences knew she believed them and would stand by them. She is remembered for having an open-door policy at conventions. If you approached her with a personal story, she would listen intently, sometimes even giving her private contact details to continue the dialogue. Those one-on-one connections endeared her to fans beyond just her Star Trek persona. She embodied a paradox. Once overshadowed and nearly destroyed by the system, she re-emerged to show kindness and support to those still navigating it. Another aspect of her later life often overlooked is how she nurtured her spiritual beliefs. She talked occasionally about the role faith played in her recovery, referencing how prayer or spiritual reflection helped her find forgiveness, both for the person who assaulted her and for herself. This quiet spiritual dimension gave her a sense of grace in dealing with regrets. Though she rarely went into deep theological discussions publicly, those who knew her closely described her as someone who approached worship and fellowship with the same sincerity she once devoted to performing. By the time she filmed her cameo in Of Gods and Men, 2007, a fan-created film featuring original Star Trek actors, she looked serene in her scenes. She wore the Starfleet uniform with an air of self-acceptance, as if acknowledging her complicated place in the franchise's legacy. Yes, she had been hurt by Star Trek's production environment, but she had also been redeemed through it. She forged lasting friendships with many co-stars who were happy to see her revived and sober. Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov, and George Takei, Sulu, were among those who frequently greeted her warmly at conventions, giving the public glimpses of a cast that still cared about each other decades after filming. These glimpses were important. Fans recognized that sometimes the behind-the-scenes reality isn't simple, but there can still be genuine bonds forged in adversity. In 2011, William Shatner created The Captains, traveling around to interview actors who portrayed captains in various Star Trek incarnations. He included a segment on the original series, and Grace Lee Whitney made a brief appearance. Though not a captain, she was integral to the show's earliest episodes and shared her perspective on that time. The documentary revealed her positive relationship with Shatner, dispelling rumors that they'd been at odds. She spoke about how surreal it felt to see Star Trek become a massive cultural force when, In the mid-1960s, it was just another pilot that might or might not be picked up. The starry-eyed hope that it might succeed was tempered by the brutal ratings wars of network television. But as she pointed out with a small smile, turns out a lot of people wanted to explore space along with us. She died 4 years after that documentary at an advanced age and in a place she found peaceful. Her official cause of death was listed as natural causes, which for her fans meant she left the world on her own terms, not haunted by addiction or overshadowed by scandal. In her last decade, she firmly established the narrative that she was more than the tragedies she endured. This gave hope to many. Star Trek fans often lionize the show's optimism, the idea that humanity will overcome its flaws, unify, and explore the stars together. Whitney's real-life journey in some ways mirrored that hopeful arc. She was cast aside, faced darkness, then found a personal renaissance by reconnecting with the people in the franchise that had once been part of her downfall. After her death, discussions arose about whether the industry had learned enough from stories like hers. Today, more protections, guidelines, and open dialogues exist, but we also see that systemic issues linger. Some fans and historians point to Grace Lee Whitney as someone who, in her own quiet way, laid part of the groundwork for future movements against harassment. She didn't have the social media networks or cultural climate to spark immediate mass protest, but by eventually speaking openly about her experiences, she challenged the notion that old Hollywood secrets must remain buried. Her legacy is multifaceted. To Star Trek devotees, she's Yeoman Rand, the loyal officer with a trademark hairstyle, deeply fond of her captain. To anyone struggling with addiction, she's a testament that it's possible to reclaim your life and restore your relationships, even if you spiral to the verge of tragedy. To those analyzing Hollywood's historical treatment of women, her story is a clear example of how toxic power structures could derail careers and traumatize individuals. And to those who simply appreciate a good comeback story, she's a prime example of resilience. She used her second chance not merely for personal gain, but to elevate others who might be enduring similar hardships. Why did she remain silent about the assault for so many years? Perhaps because she was afraid, or perhaps because she needed time to heal and find her footing outside the fear of retribution? Had she spoken earlier? Might she have been fired from Star Trek even sooner? Might the studio have crushed her chances to continue in the industry at all? These are the questions that linger, prompting reflection on how entire systems once operated. She herself asked fans to ponder them, not to stir revenge, but to drive understanding that these issues were far more common than the public realized. Ultimately, her life was not defined by that secret. It shaped her pain, but she chose to define herself by her recovery and by her ability to love an industry that had also hurt her. She played a key role in fan films and official films, bridging decades of Star Trek history. Even those who focus solely on her cameo appearances in that franchise can see the arc of redemption. From an uncertain actress anxious about losing her job, to a re-energized cameo star welcomed back by a fandom that embraced her with open arms. For many, that stands as a reminder that the Star Trek ethos of hope and unity isn't just a fictional ideal. It can also find reflections in the real lives of the actors who brought it to life. In the end, when we talk about Grace Lee Whitney, we're talking about an artist who showcased her talents on radio, on Broadway, in nightclubs, in Hollywood comedies, on beloved television westerns, and of course in Star Trek. We're also talking about a survivor who experienced addiction, overcame it, and dedicated her later years to guiding others towards sobriety. We're also talking about a woman who endured abuse yet refused to let that destroy her spirit forever, choosing later to speak out and let the truth be known. From the vantage point of history, she left an enduring message. The path to redemption is open to all, no matter how improbable it may appear. If we return to the question at the end of her final on-screen appearances, why she kept quiet for years about the assault and whether she feared losing her Star Trek role by speaking out, the answer seems painfully clear. Back then, the entertainment world did not protect survivors. It protected influential men and profitable shows. Grace Lee Whitney's fear was well-founded. Sadly, it's likely she would have been branded a nuisance or even a liar had she dared to speak. In modern times, we might look back with outrage, wishing she could have been heard and believed immediately. Yet at least her story eventually emerged, and fans can honor the courage it took to reclaim her narrative. That complex legacy includes a cautionary tale, a story of resilience, and ultimately a tribute to a woman who managed to redefine her life on her own terms. Thank you for staying with me through this deep dive into Grace Lee Whitney's multifaceted journey. We've explored how a young girl from Michigan soared onto the radio waves in Detroit, landed stage roles in New York, appeared alongside Hollywood's biggest names, joined the pioneering world of Star Trek, and later faced professional betrayal and personal despair. We've seen how she found redemption, overcame addiction, and ultimately became a guide to others in need. Her story prompts big questions about old Hollywood, about exploitation, about survival, and about hope. If you feel moved by her example, perhaps you'll look into her interviews, or watch her cameo appearances in the Star Trek movies, or maybe you'll simply carry forward the lesson that even in the darkest times there can be a path back to the light. Now, as we wrap up, consider the pressing question: did she keep quiet because she feared losing her position on Star Trek, or because the culture was so punitive that she had no other realistic choice? And what lessons can we apply today to ensure that future generations of artists, male or female, need never suffer in silence? These are questions well worth pondering. Grace Lee Whitney's life gives us a vantage point from which we can reflect on progress made and the changes still needed. One thing is certain: no matter how brief her official role was in the original series, her imprint on Star Trek's legacy and on the broader conversation about addiction and survival remains profound. Let's keep celebrating that resilience, and let's keep examining what we can do better in our own world to protect and respect every performer who dares to bring their gifts to the stage or screen.